Thank you, and thank you indeed for the opportunity to be here and to navigate and discuss the challenge of the transition from the old economy to the new economy. And in fact, that transition is not a choice. And in this session, perhaps we will get to some of the elements in terms of the requirements to be able to transition that successfully in Australia and the policy and funding environment that can facilitate such a transition. Now, we've heard across the 2 days about the transition of the workforce, transition of the jobs required for the future economy, the loss of some 5 million jobs projected in the Australia's Future Workforce Report, really highlighting the requirements in the future for those professional skills, the high social interaction, high creativity, technology based not only on STEM, but the ability to connect to our behaviours as consumers and to global markets. We've really begun to reflect on the ingredients that are required to propel us forwards into that new economy. We've understood the requirements for global connectivity. No national knowledge-based economy is going to exist in isolation. The requirements for the knowledge economy is to be necessarily naturally connected for high levels of collaboration so that innovation will flow through to new markets, new adaptability in those markets, and then building further connectivity and collaboration. We've begin to bring together the critical elements of the productivity and skills agenda. Where will we have and position the graduates of the future from all parts of our education system? We understand there will be more jobs in the Australia of 2025, some 2 million. They predominantly will be professional jobs with the characteristics that we understand the new economy requires. And we know that the majority will require post-school qualifications. So beginning now, how do we, with the education system, ensure that we have graduates who are future-proofed? And clearly that requires a higher degree of connectivity with our businesses, with our industry, community organisations as we move forwards. And that connectivity is a mark of many economies where there are high engagements together with connectivity, universities, businesses and governments, work integrated learning, internships, placements, both within Australia and in our global markets. So building global connectivity and building business connectivity are in a sense absolutely prerequisite in the economy of the future. And reasonably underpinning knowledge economy across Australia is a requirement to ensure that that knowledge-based economy is not solely captured in the CBD areas, but rather permeates through to the outer metropolitan areas and then through to regions. The extremely good Association of Local Government Association report highlighted the criticality for economic growth, the requirement to reduce income inequality, and particularly within regions. So that in the new economy, it cannot be a new economy that is only owned and placed in part of Australia. It has to permeate and be facilitated and catalysed across the regions of Australia, where regional inequality of income or inequality of education might stymie the potential productivity and economic growth of Australia. And finally, we need a joined up education system that recognises at each stage, as we have heard from Sue and we've heard from the Minister, that this is a team game, that we have to have alignment between what happens in early childcare and what happens within the tertiary and higher education systems. Having state boundaries determine whether or not there can be progress through that education system to its optimal outcome as a graduate is really placing barriers in front of that new economy that we can do well without, given the competition we face. So how do we sit in Australia against those requirements? Well, let's consider where we sit in the higher education part of that education system. Where do we sit on the world stage? Because part of global connectivity requires global mobility of ideas between centres of excellence. It requires connecting university and partners together across national boundaries, connecting industry partners of universities to industry partners overseas. It particularly involves a connectivity to Asia, a building of global mobility of Australian students to Asia, and a growth in Asian literacy. And our standing in the global innovation and knowledge system really hangs off the reputation of our universities, and we've done well as a system of young universities. The Australian higher education system demonstrably has half of our universities in the top 4% of world universities. That is remarkable given that we're a median age of some 30 years of age in this young Australian education system, and reasonably we compete against much more prestigious, much more traditional, much more established institutions. And it is that standing on the world stage, no matter how one considers rankings, that gives us an advantage in terms of our international education and attracting students whose parents across the world have to make decisions on the excellence, quality and safety of an education system to invest in for their son or daughter. And it gives us an advantage in terms of our partnerships between institutions of high standing. And demonstrably, we've built, as an education system, the third highest export system in Australia, non-minerals based, and we've also engaged with that powerful mobility piece. One interesting initiative that sort of signals the new way this is moving. This year, some 50 students at our university, our Chinese students, will go to Beijing to work in Beijing, but to work with Australian companies in Beijing, facilitated by the Australian Chamber of Commerce. So there's many different forms of global mobility that will engage and connect Australia, and in that case, China, through graduates, through business, innovation, and through the remarkable powerhouse of research and innovation in those Australian universities. So that's a terrific asset for us. Less strong, however, is the innovation ecosystem in Australia. We haven't arrived at where jurisdictions, the UK for instance is an example, where not only are there strong universities connected to businesses and industries and companies in the regions to drive the regional economies and to drive the national economy, we have been missing some of those policy frameworks that allow the development of, for instance, the catapult centres in the UK, so very much part of productivity and skills development for the future of the UK, new industries emerging, and separately in setting up innovation and entrepreneurship as utterly central to the engagement of universities, the development of entrepreneurial graduates, and the startup system that really across regions small and large in the UK is facilitated by a number of collaborations and partnerships, often with some policy and government support, including the Set Squared initiative, which is a powerhouse of innovation and entrepreneurship across 5 major regional universities. So our innovation ecosystem requires work. A strength, however, has been our demand-driven system has built strong participation. And universities across Australia, those in the cities, those in the regions, have equally responded to the challenge of building not only access to university, but also success at university. So this is a piece of strengths that we have, but the challenges moving forward to realise those strengths built up over many different governments, investment strategies, and many different adaptations by nimble and agile universities to ensure that they have held their own on the world stage, not only in education, but in research and innovation. We're at a critical point. And the critical point comes now to how we move forward in navigating to that new economy in an environment of perhaps what one might say was fragmented reform. And the need for joined-up reform has never been more critical in the education system. So reasonably, what are the current challenges? And let's look at, for instance, where and how the current higher education reform agenda might place the Australian higher education system as part of that education framework. So we're all aware, because we have lived it for over a year, and it is similar to Groundhog Day. Every morning we will wake up and hear more about the cut to Commonwealth funding for universities, 20% of Commonwealth funding to be replaced by private investment, the investment by students in their fees. Because of the way funding is parcelled currently, that means the Commonwealth's 20% decrease has to be replaced by an overall 30% increase in student fees. And that allows the scenario which students' choices and their ability to pay essentially will determine what are the disciplines, what are the direction, what is the contribution that Australia's universities can make, not only to the outcomes of the students' education, but also within their region to the regional economy. Because allowing the balance of decision-making to reside with student choice may not have the joined-up outcome we might aspire to. I just want to take very briefly one of the comments made by Minister Pyne at the announcement of the higher education reform, which was that market-based competition will effectively determine the cost of a degree, so that prestige universities can charge more for a degree than their regional counterparts. Now, this might be the language of history, of reflecting that regions are rather, in a sense, the places where the economy will slow down and simply be a mark of history, rather than economies, if the regions are a place for economic growth and connectivity globally and with business and industry. Very briefly, as a case study, the University of Newcastle has 40,000 students. Its catchment area extends from the central coast of New South Wales up through the Hunter to mid-north coast. It is utterly in a region where there is existing low educational attainment, and it has delivered on the participation agenda by both access and ensuring success. So it has 24% of low socioeconomic category students. It has 2.6% Indigenous students. That's almost double the proportion nationally and in the state. And it has worked enormously hard to build pathways for those students to make good some of the gaps in secondary education. It has the largest pathways program into university in the country. And its equity mission is utterly inclusive of excellence and driving innovation. It is in the top 3% of the world's universities. It was top when it was under 50 last year in the universities under 50 in the world ranking for Australia. It's top 3 in the country for the excellence and innovation of its engineering research, as independently assessed by the Excellence in Research Australia exercise. And so here we have a hub in a region positioned to drive innovation, entrepreneurship, and connect to business, to make good some of the deficit in Australia of university business, university industry connectivity, to make good in Australia some of the key issues that reside from not having enough of our researchers in our local industries and business, and to really be part of the push of the new economy. But under our new system, the fees that a student will pay for an engineering degree will rise by almost 60%. So we have a premium product, but we are in a market which may not have the capacity to pay. And I believe we need to understand those consequences in Australia of this system. So in short, I think we do need to discuss a way forward for public-private investment. I noticed that Microsoft have recently invested in a new campus in the University of Washington, Seattle, because they're seeking to build the flow and pipeline of the graduates they need for their future industry. So where are our public-private partnerships, as it were, to build a resilient system? We do need to be careful about the impact of a sudden introduction of full fee deregulation, perhaps consider titrating the introduction to make sure we don't inadvertently lose pieces of our current high-performing system or lose the capacity to join up the lower-performing parts of the system, because we may not know what we've got till it's gone. And reasonably, the opportunity to align the Minister of Industry and Science's agenda for innovation and boosting competitiveness with this high-skill, high participation agenda is absolutely central to the new economy. So let's hasten with less speed with a introduction of a sudden change that may limit the capacity to achieve that new economy. Thank you.